going, if everybody's okay with that.
Works for me.
So right now we're just missing 2.
Okay, who is this? Oh, that's Bob. There's Madhu. We are missing, is Rachel one of the 2?
Rachel and a new member, Kristen.
Kristen. All right, we'll give a couple moments. Sam, welcome. I know we exchanged quick emails. Hopefully John was more helpful to you than I was.
Thank you. Yeah, you both were. Thanks for sending everything over, John.
No problem.
And Vic, did I hear when I listened to the planning board meeting that you go by Vic?
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome, Vic, and welcome, I guess, by extension to the planning board. It's not my board to welcome you to, but thank you for your service. What time is it? 7:01? How about we wait 2 more minutes and then we'll get rolling. John, do you know anything by any chance about Rachel or Kristen for tonight?
I don't. They have not reached out to me.
All right. And I don't see anyone from the public yet. So maybe they'll show up. Maybe not. Last time we had a couple folks from the public. I don't know if they were more interested in trees or MBTA, but they stuck around for the full meeting.
I think there'll be a couple of people from the chamber signing in.
Okay. Out of curiosity, are they interested in MBTA or trees or both?
MBTA.
Okay. There's Chuck Joseph signing in. Not quite at 7:03, according to my computer clock. John, I don't anticipate that I'm going to need the screen at all, so hopefully you can run all the magic for anything like that that comes up.
Okay.
All right. I see 7:03 in front of me, so we'll get things started. And as people come in, hopefully John will click them in. First, I got to read the script. Good evening. I am Ted Barker Hook, Chair of the Zoning Advisory Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting via virtual means. Participants may access this meeting through the remote meeting link as posted on the meeting agenda and through the town's online calendar. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by raising their hand or virtual hand or otherwise signaling their intent to speak. When called on by the chair, please begin your comment by clearly stating your name and address. This meeting will be recorded. Please take care to mute your microphone unless you have been recognized by the chair. We will now confirm attendance of members. Please respond with present if you are on this call. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Present.
Ron Foisey.
Present.
Arnold Cohen.
Here.
Madhu Chandrasekhar. Madhu, you're here, I think.
I said present. Are you able to hear me?
I am now. I think that maybe you misfired on the anti-mute.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, Rachel
Yes.
Rawson.
Present.
Wonderful. Rachel Rawson. I don't think so yet. Curtis Smithson.
Present.
Vic, is it Pratty or Proddy, Vic? I didn't hear your answer.
My bad. I'm on mute. It's Vic Prati.
Proddy, Vic Proddy, and so you're present.
Mhm.
Kristen Borzamato. I don't think Kristen came in. And Sam Sater.
Present.
Also assisting us as ever, John Gelsich.
Present.
Fantastic. I I always like to turn John's agenda upside down a little bit and get the minutes out of the way first. I may have been the only one to say to John, I didn't see the minutes, but he did resend them. Did everybody have a chance to look over the minutes? These are the minutes of July
Yes.
31st. I think, John, we're still waiting on the June minutes because those got pushed off last meeting. Because I think you said you didn't send them. So just,
Okay, I'll check. I completely forgot about those. I'll check.
that's cool. Note to John, the June meeting, I think we still need to vote on those minutes. I would love a motion to accept the minutes of July 31st, 2023.
So move.
And a second,
Second.
and we'll do a roll call vote. Mary,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Arnold,
Yes.
Madhu,
Yes,
Curtis,
Yes.
Vic,
Yes.
and Sam.
Yes.
Fantastic. Our first item of real weight on the agenda is the MBTA communities discussion and public input. I'm curious, Ron, are you still expecting more, do you think? Or should we flip-flop these two items or no?
I think that the MBTA is probably of most interest, and whoever is here will speak to it. I don't think we
Okay.
need to wait.
Okay, great. So we'll do that first. We've already done some discussions. We've done a lot, but John gave us a lot more detail last week. But given that we have some folks who were not with us the last few meetings, I know, Rob, you would have known a lot of this through the planning board. But I wonder, John, do you think sharing the slideshow from the Charles River, whatever that group was, is worthwhile at this point? Even though I was in these discussions, I found the slideshow really helpful to put it in kind of greater Commonwealth-wide context.
Ed, I'm gonna
Yes.
recuse myself from the MBTA discussions for obvious reasons.
Okay, that's
I'm in-
fine.
I went in one of the districts, so it'd probably be a good idea if I didn't
John, do you
participate.
think,
Does that
do you
leave
think-
us?
Curtis, you may do whatever you choose, I think, but do you think he needs to recuse himself from discussions, John, or just votes?
It's up to him.
Okay,
I mean, if he's not going to vote, it might make sense to recuse himself from the discussions just to eliminate any sense of
okay,
impact on the discussion.
okay. So we'll leave it up to you mostly, Curtis, but if there's a discussion on South Street, for example, I don't see any reason that your opinion on what might be good or not good for South Street shouldn't be considered.
Okay.
Well, we'll leave that up to you.
Okay, thanks.
John?
All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So MBTA communities. So this is not my presentation. So I don't necessarily know what they were talking about with each slide, but I can try and go through the information as best I can. And if anyone needs to add anything, please just jump in. I'm just going to skip some slides because I'm sure there was background that they went through that I don't really know what they were talking about since I didn't attend the presentation. So I think this slide is basically just saying that housing production in Massachusetts has dropped significantly since the 80s. And I think that's what everyone is seeing as fueling the housing crisis currently going on in the state, is that we are just not keeping up with the number of housing units that we need to keep up with in order to accommodate our population. And I believe that this is what it's reflecting. Massachusetts has some of the highest housing costs in the country, both for sales and for rentals. And one of the lowest rates of building permit issuances for metro areas in the country. So I will note, one of the reasons we're probably seeing the ones on the right of this chart being northeast metros is don't have a ton of land. And all on the left, you've got a bunch of larger states, southern states that have a lot of land left to develop. So while there are things that we're fighting against here in Massachusetts, that doesn't mean that we can't build more dense housing. It just means that we have less land to play with compared to other states. And they were using Needham as an example in this one. Just talks about how many housing units.
I found, John, these couple towns, none of them are Hopkinton, but I think a town like Needham or Wellesley is interesting to look at and compare to what we think our growing housing stock looks like, the types of housing we have.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, Newton's a city, but there is plenty of single family housing in Newton. You see the multifamily around the transportation nodes, single family throughout the rest of the town. And that's essentially what the state is trying to do through this whole initiative is focus the density around the transportation nodes. That's why it's MBTA communities. But then realizing that some towns, such as Hopkinton, don't really have a lot of space within the area for transportation. And so they're allowing some other fragmentation of these districts to allow for housing all around town. But the towns that we're looking at right now all have commuter rail access, T access, potentially bus access, express bus access, a little different than Hopkinton. Wellesley may be the most similar. They have commuter rail.
I'm curious, do you know where that massive growth of blue is? Is that the 128, 490, or 128 Route 9 interchange development? Do you have any clue?
I don't know. 128, does that go through Wellesley?
The little corner where 128 hits Route 9, I'm pretty sure is still Wellesley.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we were looking at solar overlays, Wellesley made inside one of those clover leaves acceptable to solar. And that's why I remember that being a Wellesley.
I mean, it certainly could be that area, but I would suspect it's going to be probably more than one area. It looks like it's over 300, almost 350 units. So unless it's one really big development, they probably split it up. So that's a good question. So now we're talking about why revising the Zoning Act. So the Zoning Act is the state act that allows towns to implement zoning. And it gives towns certain authority to do that with limitations. And one of these things is basically the revision to the Zoning Act is MBTA communities, Section 3A, that changes what we are required to do. A lot of people are still viewing MBTA communities as an option, and it is in a certain sense, but the state has made it very clear that if you do not adopt MBTA communities, you're going to be either facing lawsuits from fair housing laws. The AG, the Attorney General, has said that is a possibility. You are not going to be eligible for 3 grants, and then I believe they added 13 additional grants that will use MBTA compliance in their decision making. So you could potentially be excluded from 16 grants at the state level. And I would imagine that list will continue to grow depending on the participation statewide. There's just a timeline of that whole process. And we did comply with this January 31st deadline. So we are in compliance currently. That compliance expires December 31st, 2024. And the only way that we can continue to comply up to that point and after is by adopting MBTA communities districts, meeting the requirements in town.
John, I'm curious, and maybe others are, can you summarize what the action plan that was submitted entailed? What was in it?
It was very simple. It was just a form that we submitted online identifying. So I'll show you the map at the end of this presentation that we put together for Hopkinton. The parcels in purple are the parcels that we identified as preliminary parcels for the district. And then it was just really a timeline for when we anticipate adopting MBTA communities should everything go to plan. Okay. So it was really just, January 31st, 2023 to May 2024 is our frame, because we're trying to get it for annual town meeting and not have to call a special town meeting for the adoption.
Okay.
So this just describes what the MBTA communities are, certain categories: rapid transit, commuter rail, adjacent, and adjacent small town. We are an adjacent community, which allows us certain flexibility and also reduces the number of housing units. I think originally the calculation was we had to do something like 950 units, and now they've dropped that down to 750 units. So that's really just, we don't have to build them, we just have to zone for them. So at 15 units per acre, 50 acres, so it's 750 units. Basic requirements, I won't read through these. And this area down here is the new changes to the non-compliant towns and what they will not be eligible for. We are the adjacent. So the unit capacity is what we had in housing units as of the 2020 census. So it's either 750 units, 15 units per acre with 50 acres, or 10% of the units. I think whichever is greater. And I think the 750 is what we have to go with.
John, maybe I'm alone. Could you break that last explanation down a little bit more carefully for me? And maybe others?
I'm going to probably get it wrong because it's not in front of me. There was,
when I teach, there are questions I have for myself, and I hope no student asks. And then when they do, I make that exact noise.
So the explanation for this is in my presentation that I gave to the select board, but it's out of date because I was using the usual calculation. But anyway, so I believe it's something like you have to meet a minimum density, right? It has to be either 15 units per acre at 50 acres, or 10% of your 2020 census housing stock. Our 2020 census housing stock is I want to say it's like 6,000 something hundred. I don't remember what it is, but bottom line is we have to qualify for the 750 units. That's what the state is holding us to, not the 10%, the 50 acres at 15 units per acre.
If the 10% were 800 units, then we'd be fine. It's the higher bar we have to meet.
I'm trying to remember what it is. I can look into it later and give you an answer. I don't remember off the top of my head right now.
All right.
But the bottom line is that we are required to comply with the 750 units.
Okay.
Quick question.
Sure. Go ahead.
On that last slide, number 2, percentage of district located near transit depends on developable land near stations, which obviously we don't have a lot of developable land near the station, but what percentage do we have a percentage goal that is near the station?
So we don't have a percentage goal specifically. We do have, as Curtis mentioned before, certain parcels identified near the transit station that are part of the map that we are looking at. But there's no 50% of the land has to be within the transit station.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, we have
Mary, I'm sorry, John. I thought you were done. Maybe I made you done. You can see, Mary, that number 2 pertains to the rapid transit and commuter rail community under location.
And I noticed that right as John was finishing his explanation.
Maybe others didn't see it.
Thanks.
Sorry, I'm also taking minutes. All right. So this is an image that has become very popular in the planning world. It's what's called the missing middle. And we see a lot of mid-rise and high-rise multifamily developments in Massachusetts, and we see a lot of detached single-family housing. The goal with the 15 units per acre is to create more of this type of housing. Not the single family detached and not the large scale apartment complexes. Though, depending on the parcel, this can be built, right? Because that would satisfy the 15 units per acre, potentially. But really the goal is to do these different types of housing, provide some variability in the housing options for residents of the state. This gives towns a little bit more opportunity for attractive housing if they don't think the large apartment complexes are attractive. It gives options for townhouses, courtyard type developments, 2 levels of residence on top with retail on the bottom, those types of things. And it just gives a little bit of variability to make all the housing not so cookie cutter. But the missing middle is really what a lot of planners have focused on to really reduce the housing crisis issue. Is if we can get these, they are multifamily, but they're not apartment complex multifamily. And so if we can do a little bit more of these, they might be more acceptable to the towns, they might be more attractive, and they might satisfy a need that is currently not being satisfied.
Through the chair.
Sure, go ahead, Curtis.
I said I wasn't going to say anything, but has anybody looked at what it would take to achieve that 15 units per acre? Seems like, duplexes probably wouldn't get to that level.
So I will ask you to wait until the next slide.
Okay. Jump the gun, sorry.
If I looked at it properly. So they did have, through the presentations that the state has given, they have given us, and I think I actually sent it out after the last meeting, the visualizing density. It had, it was like a 50-page slideshow. I think somebody asked about it. Maybe it was you, Curtis, that had what certain densities look like in real life. And
Okay.
I think we see some images of that. So
Excuse me,
What is-
through the chair, I don't know if I'm not being on a board member anymore, so I don't know what the rules are. But I said one quick question, if I may. Do any of our present now, when you were talking about that middle section, we do have that at Legacy, and we do have that at some. At whatever the one is off Lumber Street. I forget what the new name is. It's been sold 3 times now since we put it in.
Windsor and Hopkinton.
Yeah. Do those count at all against some of those numbers? Do we get any credit for that?
No, so those developments were all done through a discretionary permit, and the MBTA communities law requires that housing is developed by right. So no discretionary permits like special permits can be required. That's one of the reasons we took away the special permit for inclusionary housing, because if we were to pass the MBTA communities and they needed to provide affordable, and we wanted them to provide affordable housing, but they had to get a special permit for it, the developers could potentially be exempt from providing the affordable housing because it required a discretionary permit. And I think it'll probably go into this. If not, I can discuss it in a little bit more detail of what control the town actually would have. It's very limited. The housing units would be able to be built at 15 units per acre by right, but there is a provision for a limited site plan review. Otherwise, the town can't restrict bedrooms, size, density up to 15 units per acre. You can max it out at 15 units per acre, but that's about it. And other certain things. Now, in the bylaws that we have, in the draft ones that I sent around, if anyone's looked at them, there are certain guidelines within the model bylaw that says orientation needs to be this way. There needs to be parking in these locations to basically regulate a little bit of the site design for the developer without the town having that discretionary authority, but it's designed in a way that it's likely what towns would ask for. No parking between the frontage or in the front yard of the building. All the parking has to be behind the building, away from the street. All the front doors need to face the frontage, that kind of a thing.
John
Just to make things a little bit more attractive.
John Gelsich?
Yes.
I know John Catino, and I know you know John Catino. Do we need John to say John Catino?
Yes, thank you.
John,
Yeah.
What's your name? Where do you live?
I totally apologize.
That's okay.
It's been like 20 years on this wonderful board. John Catino, 1 David Joseph Road.
Thank you, John. Did I hear another voice?
Yeah, through the chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Just a clarification, John. I think if I heard you correctly, you were saying we don't have to actually approve the construction or the developments, but it's mainly the zoning. And so, similar to John's question, do we have any zoning that already meets those requirements or goes towards that total, or is that net new that we're on the hook for?
So the short answer is no, we don't have any zoning that meets the requirements. Any multifamily in town requires some type of discretionary permit. So I've talked to some developers about what could be done downtown with MBTA communities, without MBTA communities, and higher densities can be achieved downtown without MBTA communities, but it requires a special permit. So in order to get those types of developments, a discretionary permit needs to be issued. This would require no discretionary permit.
And if we're only on the hook for zoning appropriately, and we don't have direct control over the units being developed, where does that put us?
I don't quite understand your question.
I guess if I understand correct, let's say we proceed and we zone in a way that meets the requirements, but we don't control the pace of development or folks actually taking advantage of the zoning. So would we continue to be, I guess, non-compliant if we don't end up with those 750 units?
No, so the units don't have to be built. They just have to be zoned.
Okay.
So the compliance, because the state realizes towns can't force developers to build units, right? And so holding towns accountable for something they have no control over doesn't seem very fair. So really the town is just responsible for adopting these zoning requirements. And then if they get developed, they get developed. If they don't, they don't. And so it's going to be an overlay, not base zoning. You can make it base zoning, but the base zoning will still control unless somebody chooses to develop under the overlay.
Thank you.
So in other words, if we wanted to encourage downtown as part of MBTA, we'd put an overlay over the downtown stretch. Yes?
Correct.
Is that the end of the slides?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Halfway done. So this is some examples of what that multifamily housing would look like from the state. Let's see, what are we looking at here? So this is a new graphic that I have not seen.
I don't think this applies to us.
I don't think it does, but it's saying the number of municipalities for a lot of these. Oh, maybe we are in the 94 here because 0% needs to be within the station area. Yeah, I'm sure they explained this a little bit more. I wasn't at the presentation, so I didn't hear what it was. So I can't fully explain this, but that would be my guess, is that a lot of the 94 communities are the adjacent small town and the adjacent communities. And therefore 0% needs to be within the transit station area.
Okay.
And this is talking about the reasonable size for the minimum land area. We are one of the communities that has to be at least 50 acres. Does not have to be within half a mile of the transit station. And so this third point is kind of an important point. We could theoretically have lower density and not do 15 units per acre, but more land has to be zoned MBTA communities. The mean has to be 15 units per acre. So if you have, I'm not good with math right off the top of my head, but if you had 100 acres, right, you could zone for 7.5 units per acre. If you have 50 acres, it's 15 units per acre, right? So there's that flexibility, but 100 acres is a lot of land.
So if a goal was to discourage very dense development, we would have to have a bigger overlay. If
Yes.
one of our goals.
Yes, and I'm sure there are like smaller requirements that may create problems with that very simple thinking, but generally that's my understanding.
Okay. But in the end, it's still 750 units.
Yes.
That number doesn't change.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So this is, I guess there's a description of unit capacity. I don't think that's very helpful for us. The compliance model is something that we had worked with Bowler Engineering on. Mass Housing Partnership gave a bunch of communities funding to undertake this. As we expected, we do not have any compliant districts, so our compliance model showed that we need to adopt 50 acres or more of MBTA community zoned districts. This is just talking about affordable housing, capital A affordable housing, so this would be deed restricted. And our draft bylaw does include a requirement that 10% of the units over 5, just like the inclusionary zoning bylaw, should be affordable. Or must be affordable, I should say. I don't even want to say should be. They must be affordable.
Mhm.
And this is one of the new revisions to 3A that we just got last month. Still trying to figure out how it applies to Hopkinton, so I can't really give a good explanation of this, but they did change the regulations to allow for mixed-use development. So retail on the first floor and then residential on the upper floors, which is something that a lot of towns were looking for because that just allows for mixed use, a little bit of offsetting of the taxes or the costs, and allowing for just better design developments in general.
It looks like from the pictures, if this was something we wanted to pursue, would be a downtown kind of thing. If people wanted to, if a developer wanted to level our buildings from Hopyo on up to Bills or something and rebuild downtown as 2, 3, I don't know what our height requirement is there, but that's where this would fit in, I suppose.
Sorry.
It's okay.
All right. Technical assistance. They provide some technical assistance. I think they are focusing more on the inner core communities for the technical assistance. There's a lot more going on there in terms of what their requirements are and where these districts can be located. So we've taken advantage of technical assistance where we can, and we still have the opportunity to look at some more opportunities for technical assistance if it's needed. So this is what the 3A, which is the MBTA communities, does not do. As I said before, it does not require the units to be built. That's not something that the towns are compelled to do. We do not have to pay for infrastructure. So if a certain development parcel is identified as MBTA communities and it needs water and sewer to build those densities, the town does not have to upgrade the infrastructure to allow for that to happen. The developer can pay for that, but the town is not on the hook for that. Wetlands are still protected. Concom still has authority over that. Historic districts still have authority. And we can't get a waiver exemption from the MBTA communities requirements. So we either have to adopt or we vote it down at town meeting and we take what comes in terms of legal challenges and grants.
Through the chair.
Sure, go ahead.
John, what does technical assistance consist of? Could it potentially mean like putting together a lot of the similar numbers you're showing here for our community?
So the technical assistance, they're not going to write the bylaw for us. They're not going to identify the parcels. They're going to, so we got technical assistance for the compliance model showing that we don't comply currently. So we need to actually adopt new districts. Depending on the community, it can mean different things. For the inner core, you have a lot more challenges in terms of location and how you can do it and what you're looking for. So they might help with that. We would need to identify what we would like assistance with, and then we can seek that assistance. But if we just reach out to the state and say, we need help, they're going to say, with what? And we're going to say, we don't know. We're like, all right, let us know. So right now, I think we just need to identify the districts and then get the model bylaw as close to complete as possible. And then the next step I want to do is reach out to the state. They will review the bylaw for compliance should it pass at town meeting, so that when we get to town meeting and we have the final bylaw and map, we can say, the state says if we pass this, we're okay.
John, do you have a
Change
date
anything.
goal for that then to submit to the state before town meeting?
Ideally, January or February of next year.
I'm going to say finish by Jan 15.
Yeah, I mean, December
Does
would
that
be
feel good to you?
Yep, December would be better, just because if we need to change things, that really limits how long we have to change those things. And it needs to go through a whole process. So we can get it onto the warrant in January, but then we still need to have planning board hearings. Planning board still needs to recommend it. We still need to go through the whole process to get that going on to town meeting. So the earlier we can finish this, the better position we're going to be. Because the other thing is, if we finish it next month, right? If this committee works really hard, gets the bylaw down, we identify the parcels, we can send it to the state in November, hopefully get a response from them quickly. I don't know what their turnaround time is. And then we can do more public outreach about what we're actually proposing and answer questions and really get this settled with the town, hopefully before town meeting. I understand that is very optimistic, but I think the earlier we can get a working, almost final or final bylaw and map, the better we're going to be.
So can I just drill down a little bit? We, Zach, work on this. Does it then go to the planning board before you send it to the state, or from Zach, then you send it to the state, then back to the planning board?
So it could really, I'd have to look at the process for the state. It really could probably go from Zach to the state to the planning board, or Zach to planning board to the state. I would prefer planning board tells me what they want me to do.
Okay.
If Zach can recommend it to the planning board can have one meeting on it, and they can say, as they continue to deliberate, we can bring it to the state and see if they can check compliance. The issue is, if planning board makes changes, that compliance opinion from the state is ineffective, right?
All right. I don't know if I'll be the chair 2-3 weeks from now, whenever our next meeting is, but I'm going to say Zach finishes by December 30th is our goal. And then John, you can decide if it should go to planning board from there, or if you want to, does that feel better? December 30th?
I mean, it's mid-September. I would say December 1st or end of November.
You've got the bigger picture in your mind. So boom, I just pushed it back to December 1st. This will be our number one primary goal.
Yes.
Oh, I had a quick question on this slide, John. Sorry.
Yep.
It may be kind of minor for us right now, but I am the rep from the Conservation Commission. The third bullet down, does it supersede the State Wetlands Act? Does it also supersede Hopkinton's more stringent wetlands protection bylaws?
So this does not supersede the Wetlands Protection Act.
All right.
I'd have to check. I'm assuming, since local bylaw is not listed here, there may be some allowances for the local bylaw to be superseded.
Okay.
But and that's essentially going to be buffer area, right? So they're not going to be able to build in the wetland
Right.
resource area, but they may be able to encroach on the buffer areas depending on what the state allows.
I misstated that, but you understood what I was asking. Thanks.
It did. So there's just some clarifications.
Always good to end a slideshow with Einstein, I think. Kudos to whoever put this together.
So this is kind of what we're in the middle of right now. Getting involved at the local level to contribute towards the planning of the best possible district in our community. Questions, appendix. I think this is just this is the actual language of the act, or section 3 of the act. this is what I was talking about before. So site plan review can be required, but there are certain limitations on what we can review. I think it's like traffic and circulation, potentially screening. I'd have to look. I have it in my presentation from April. So this is what we're dealing with. If a district has multiple locations, there's a 5-acre minimum in size to count towards the minimum land area. So we are, I think all of the parcels that we've identified, or I should say all the fragments of a district that we've identified on the map are at least 5 acres, just so that they can comply.
And I think you're going to show us that map in a bit. Where are we with total acres in that first version? Under the MBTA communities overlay? How many acres?
I haven't done the math. We can do it quickly. I have all the numbers on there.
Okay.
But we're well over the 50 acres. That's if everything on the map were to get accepted, which I do not anticipate. But if everything were to get accepted, we'd be well over the 50 acres. I think we'd be well over 100 acres.
Okay.
All right, so let me share it. Let me share this now.
To the chair, this is Vic.
Go ahead, Vic.
Before the start of the presentation, you mentioned something about South Street to Curtis, and I was just trying to understand because I also fall in the same zone. If South Street is falling, do have to be recuse myself from the voting if that comes in?
I would imagine if it comes to voting, yeah, you would need to recuse yourself if we're voting on your neighborhood. Yeah, John?
So are you within any of these districts? I remember correctly, you're like over here.
Yeah, that's where I'm with that. That's right. That's where I'm.
So, I mean, you're not in the district. So the issue with Curtis is, sorry, Curtis, I'm outing you. He's in the district.
Okay.
So abutters to the district, I don't think need to recuse themselves, but maybe just not participate in the discussion over here just to make no issue with conflict of interest. So this is the map that we are working with currently. These are the areas that we've identified. I know it's hard to see. And I will go over some of the areas just in general. So the purple and the orange don't really mean much. The purple are the parcels that we submitted to the state as part of the initial compliance, the action plan that we talked about from January. We had to identify certain areas that met 50 acres, and these are the ones we just chose. But they do not have to be included in the final map. The orange ones are just the ones we've added since then. So I wanted to separate what we've already identified and what we've added since. But all of them are on equal footing. They can all be modified. They can all be either accepted or not accepted. They don't have any protections or anything like that. So I'll go this district first. So we've got, this is the Carbonis property and a little side parcel over here. And then one of the members lives right here. So that's, and so these numbers are just pure area. We're going to have to do another calculation to identify the developable area. So the state wants 50 developable acres, not 50 parcel acres. So generally, these are mostly developable. There may be like an acre or two that we give and take, but I don't think we're going to be perfectly on the 50 acres anyway. So I don't think it should be an issue.
And one reason, for example, it might not be developable is because of wetlands.
Correct.
Is that the kind of thing when you say not developable?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or, you know, wetlands, a river going through it, not just necessarily bordering vegetated wetlands, but you can't build a stream, right? So, you know, it's that kind of stuff.
We can't zone Whitehall Reservoir.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We can't zone. I mean, this is another thing right here, Hopkinton State Forest or Hopkins State Park.
Right.
We can't zone that because you can't develop it. Right. And so that would not qualify.
Okay.
So we've got these three parcels that make up about 17 acres. And then this is the Forest Lane condos, and that makes up about 22 acres, we'll call it, just in case we're rounding down. So, I mean, right there, we're over 40 acres, right? And so, or close to 40 acres, I should say. So if we just took these two, we only have to make up about 10 or 15 acres elsewhere in town. So I think 50 acres is not a huge amount when you look at it on this perspective.
John, when was the Forest Lane condos added? Was that since our last meeting? Do you know? Just because if I have thoughts on the map, if they've already been incorporated, then I don't want to repeat them.
I don't remember if that was just before the last meeting or after the last meeting.
Okay. All right.
So, yeah, so I revised it the day. I revised it the day after our meeting, so I don't remember. I'd have to look at the other version and just see.
Okay.
I think it might be safe to say,
well, we'll just roll on.
I want to say this may have been added. One of these two parcels may have been added, and then the downtown area and this area may have been added.
Okay.
I believe this was included, and I want to say this may have been included actually.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's one area up here, right? And here's the train station. So we'd get almost 40 acres within the train station, half a mile of the train station. So that's why we located these two here, so that we can have some access. And the other thing to think about is Southborough is also going to have to comply, and they are not an adjacent community because the train station's in their community. So there is going to be, if Southborough adopts it, MBTA community zoning on this side. So planning wise, it tends to make sense to have density here, and density here, rather than density all over the place, or not having density here, but still having density here.
Are we likely to work with Southborough? Are the two planning boards likely to talk to each other in this process or no?
They can. I think Southborough is going to do what Southborough is going to do for themselves. And I think Hopkinton should probably do the same, because if we base our planning on Southborough's proposal and it either changes or doesn't get approved, then we're still on our own.
Okay.
Yeah. And the one thing that's not changing is Southborough train station is going to remain here. So if we want to have walkable residences, this is the best place to do so.
And just to reiterate, we're not required to be there because we're adjacent, nor do we get bonus points for putting it in there.
Correct.
But it does make good planning zoning sense.
Yes, correct. So another area, and I'll just do this so we can capture both of those. So this is 42 and 52 South Street, I believe. This is 52. I think this is 42. And then this is a bunch of South Street. So we're looking at about 36 acres here and about 40 acres here. The concern with zoning these areas, MBTA communities, is if they get developed as residential, we are losing industrially zoned land, which is somewhat at a premium in Hopkinton. So if we want to, planning looks forward, right? We don't look at just the now, we look at the 10 and 15 and 20 years from now. And I understand industrial is not a valuable land use at this point in time due to the commercial real estate issue. But if you develop it as residential, it's likely not going to be not residential again. So do we want to preserve our industrial zone land, or do we want to turn our industrial zone land into residential uses? So that's something to consider.
You're taking my discussion points one by one.
This is the Windsor at Hopkinton, which was included, and that's about 35 acres. I would guess we're probably not going to get 30 acres out of this, because I believe this might be wetland back here, which is why they didn't develop it. But it could take a significant chunk of the 50 acres required. And then this is also the same issue with Parkwood Drive of being industrial and business zoned. Do we really want housing in those districts? The benefit is it's right near 495. So with this industrial district over here and this district over here, you have easy on, easy off access for multifamily developments for commuters. Elmwood School, town owned, so the town can control it in about 20 acres. And then we've got the downtown area. So we've got the Walcott Valley Drive, And again, this is 14 acres, but I'm going to guess we're probably going to get about 7 acres out of it because this looks like it's wetlands back here. Center School, which I'll talk about more. Actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about Center School all on its own. This is the downtown. So we had certain areas segmented into like 4 areas. I just made them into one district to avoid any confusion with the 5-acre contiguous requirement, because some of these are not 5 acres. Like this corner right here is not 5 acres. So if we just had this area, the state has said that they would probably include all of this together because it's adjacent to each other and we're not zoning the roads, right? But just for simplicity's sake, I crossed the roads, included them, made it into one district so that we have all of it as one, and the 5 acres has easily been met, and we don't have to worry about any confusion with that. Center
John,
School, yep.
Is there any reason you didn't extend that up to the Masons, you know, through Hopio and Bills along Main Street on the north side of the street?
No, there's no reason why I didn't do that. It just that it was crossing Walcott, and some of these buildings are historic, and so we might not be able to do much with them anyway. But there's no reason. We can extend it if you guys want to extend it. We can, you know, go right up to here.
And historic would put it into the non-developable pretty quickly, though, right? If they were deemed historic.
So I mean, some of these buildings are on the historic register, so you're not going to be able to tear them down. So I'd have to see what you would be able to do with those buildings. Maybe you would keep them and then build in the back, but it makes the situation there a little bit more complex.
Okay.
And to be honest, I don't know if we need to include them right now. So since this is a zoning district, right? If we adopt the minimum amount, we can always add on to it. Can't reduce it below the 50 acres because then we'd be non-compliant. But if we adopt this and we say, oh, you know, this worked out pretty well in these areas, we just want to extend it so that we can keep this type of development going. We can always do that at a later meeting. And it's up to Zach and the planning board to see if you do want to do that now or later, because if you do it now, you may run into problems with residents thinking you're trying to do too much, but then residents might be, maybe I'm taking a negative perspective on this, but maybe residents would want to see more of that developed in the same type of way.
If I may, through the chair, to piggyback on one of Ted's earlier comments when you were looking at the newest 3A mixed use, you know, looking at where Hopkinton Drug is now and it's up for sale, you know, that corner would be absolutely perfect to have some really great retail go underneath, and then apartments above. You know, that's you know, in my head, it's one of those absolute perfect spots for just what we're trying to, you know, to revitalize our downtown, get some more people in and walking in it, and then to be able to have more retail and you know, and have just a brand new building utilizing that big parking lot that's never utilized.
And to piggyback, I don't think it takes much homework to find really attractive versions of that as well, not kind of industrial Eastern European complexes, but
they really did use some pretty ugly buildings there as their examples. I don't know what towns they picked, but you know, they could have gone downtown Wellesley, you know, where I go watch the race sometimes, and it's gorgeous buildings. Or what they're doing in Watertown. Yeah. They just put up 1,200 units in Watertown in the last 18 months, and it looks gorgeous. Oh, again, John Catino, one David Joseph. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we don't need that address every time, John. Thank you, though.
Oh, okay.
John Gelsich, just to slow us down a little bit, and I think I know the answer to this. Sometimes I ask questions in case people in the public might have them. Part of that 15.7 shaded in yellowy orange is, I believe, the U.S. Post Office.
Correct.
That's still Hopkinton land that we have the right to zone, even though the federal government owns it right now, right?
So the federal government does not own it.
Oh, they don't own the post office?
Paul Mastriani owns that. And the federal government leases the land. Yes.
Oh,
correct.
Well, that makes it even more simple. I didn't know the answer, but it's an even simpler answer.
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody was enterprising enough, they could redevelop that land, locate the post office in a new facility, and have residences on top of it. That's not, it's not an impossibility. So Center School is one of the things that a lot of people have talked about. I've heard from a couple people now that they do not support MBTA communities being on the center school property because for a couple reasons, actually. The town is going through this whole process to identify uses on center school. And there's a concern that if the town were to sell it to a developer to do the proposed developments that the center school redevelopment committee or permanent building committee would like to have, the developer could potentially turn around and say, nope, we're doing MBTA communities and we're not going to go through with that. The other concern from this same situation, different perspective, is if the town owns the land and issues an RFP to a developer to not do development under MBTA communities, will the state say that that land is not compliant since the town is basically effectively not allowing MBTA communities to be developed on that land? So there's arguments basically from both sides to say, let's not include center school in MBTA communities. But that's not my decision to make. So those concerns up to you all.
A quick question and then a comment where I'm hoping you'll agree. What's an RFP?
Request for proposals.
Okay. So if there is desire in the town to put some dense housing in the center school area, we can do that without having it under the MBTA communities overlay. The MBTAs would handcuff us a little more than if we had our own zoning rules about denser housing. Or is there general resistance to dense housing that you've sensed in that land?
No, I don't think there's a resistance to dense housing. I believe the town has explored the possibility of dense housing there.
Yep.
The concern is a legal one of, are we effectively prohibiting MBTA communities on that property by looking for certain development styles, right? And the other concern is if we go through all this work to really master plan center school, and then a developer comes and does MBTA communities development style on it, is that what the town actually wants?
Right. How much, I think it was in one of the slides, John, but it might be helpful. How much control in an MBTA community zone do we have over the look of the buildings?
Not much.
Is that because our design review board doesn't have much strength? Or is that because the way the Commonwealth drew up the new MBTA communities law, or both?
I believe a little bit of both. Mostly the bylaw or the law that is going to need to be approved does not allow for that kind of thing. But even if it did, our design review board does not have approval authority on that type of thing. Yeah, the state is their I don't want to say their goal. The way that it looks from the planning perspective is the state is looking to take some, trying to put this in a nice way, take some control away from towns in order to allow housing to be built. And the trade-off is that they're limiting the amount of space that happens to 50 acres. Rather than saying we're getting rid of single family zoning statewide, they're saying you need to zone 50 acres of your land for multifamily and you're not going to really have control over a lot of it. So pick where you want it to happen and let it go. Let it get developed, how it gets developed.
And from the State House perspective, that makes complete sense, as we saw in the slideshow about what's going on with housing in Massachusetts and population shifts.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's generally the overview of the MBTA communities bylaw or law. This is our map currently. What Zach is going to need to do is narrow this down to a district. When I say district, I mean everything that's shaded is part of a district. a district is not just this 14.3 acre area and then this, center school. All of them would be the district. It's just going to be a fragmented district. So what Zach should do is narrow this down to what they think is the best district to put forward to the planning board. Planning board is going to have final say and recommend something and design something that they're going to put forth to town meeting. And then town meeting is going to have final say as to whether this gets approved or not.
Great. Thank you, John. Ron, I saw your virtual hand pop up first.
Thank you, Ted. Just wondering from a process standpoint, if we as the zoning advisory committee could kind of put out some kind of a similar type of RFP for proposals of which group of 50 acres makes the most sense to that constituency. So Concom could come up with a map and says, we want to do these things. Maybe the Trails Committee would do something. The Chamber of Commerce could come up with something. And then we would have some vested interest from the community input on what the makeup of this thing is going. But it's just we do have a little bit of time between now and December to get some additional input.
So through the chair, if I could respond.
Go ahead, John.
I don't think that would have been a bad idea, but I would have wanted to do that last spring. Because I know we have some time between now and December, but I know how quickly some of these boards can move or not quickly they can move. And I don't want to be hamstrung to get that information back and then have Zach have to process it. I think the intent is much like chamber members are on the call right now, Trails, Concom, all of them, and we have representatives from some of these boards on Zach, need to basically look at this map and say, we like these and circle them. We don't like these and cross them out. We also think you should include these. I think that's the responsibility of those boards to do it through the ZAC process rather than taking the ZAC process and branching out to these different individual boards and their process. Because I think that's just unfortunately not super efficient, and we don't have a ton of time to let that happen.
Through the board?
I like the idea. I think we just need to modify it.
I mean, John, the process is important, but I mean, we could throw it out to various boards that we think might be of interest and say, look, this is a short timetable. If you've got some input, let us know.
Right, and I think giving this map, distributing this map, if you bring it to the chamber, Ted brings it to Concom, Vic brings it to planning board if they want to weigh in on a little bit. And then I don't know if somebody's on the Trails Committee in here or whatever other boards people are on can absolutely bring this map to them, put it on the agenda and say, let's discuss and give our recommendations for what parcels should be included. And if we're missing some, recommend those that should be included as well. Or, take parcels out of the mix that we don't think should be used for those purposes. And then these representatives can bring it back to Zach and we can talk about it next meeting.
I think what you're also saying, John, is we don't want to wait to find meeting time for that. I know on the Conservation Commission, finding time to have a discussion about this map would be really difficult. And that would slow us down desperately. I think that there can be, and still stay within open meeting law, some offline discussions as well. Certainly the more input, the better, but I agree with John. We're under a time crunch. And I think we're all here because we've been asked to represent committees or represent interests in town. And ultimately, it's our job to do the best to represent those interests. And we can try to get feedback, but we just can't let it slow us down too much. Vic.
Thank you, Ted. John, thanks for the map and showing across. I have a couple of, I just need some more clarifications around a couple of things which we discussed. So first one is that you mentioned about industrial zoning, that, the South Street and this one, if we can go back to that side of it. If we don't approve it, do we have a backup plan for it? I mean, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more. So I understand these blue area and this one, these two are proposed. Am I right?
So nothing, I mean, I guess everything is proposed, right? These are all proposed.
Yeah,
nothing is officially proposed, right?
Right.
So the purple was just something that we included in the preliminary submission. It was a large area. It was near 495. Some of these businesses needed to get redeveloped. There's vacancies, especially with 52 and I think 46, if that's the right address. So those were just included for discussion purposes. If these don't get included in the MBTA communities, they're going to remain zoned industrial. So nothing needs to get done.
This is a large part of it, like 36 acres is what we're looking at this one. So do we have a backup plan if this is not included? That's what I was trying to think through, that, we need to identify other lots if we don't include them. Is that right?
So if we looked at the map as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the question that I think Ted asked earlier, is how much currently is zoned MBTA communities. Let me do some quick math.
You're right.
I had a logistical question.
Could you hang on just a sec, Curtis, while John does math? Thank you, Curtis. While John's doing that, I'd like to suggest this as we continue looking at the map. I'd like to put South Street on hold for a broader discussion to make it our last point of discussion, because I think it's probably the most intricate and might take the most thought. And maybe if there's some lower hanging fruit for suggestions for other parcels or removing other parcels, maybe we hit those first and wrap up this part of our agenda by kind of brainstorming thoughts on South Street.
So all of these parcels that are currently shown make up just under 250 acres.
Oh, wow. That's like way above than what we require.
So, I mean, if we just looked at this right here, you're looking at potentially close to 40 acres just on these parcels alone.
Yes.
If you included these two areas, and then the downtown, this area, I mean, depending on developable land, that may be 50 acres right there.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, John. That is helpful. I'm just trying to understand if we go to South Street or not. The second clarification which I wanted to have is that this is something which I'm trying to understand from the planning board bylaw and what we have it. What I heard from the discussion, the law says that we have to identify land to be zoned, but we don't have to build it. Is that my understanding right?
So we have to zone the land. We don't just identify it to be zoned. It has to be approved at town meeting.
Right.
The bylaw, the district, this map would need to be approved at town meeting to comply.
Okay.
We don't have to have the units built to comply.
Because one of the bylaw, maybe I'm wrong, but you can help me out, John, because you're also on the planning board, is that, in last meeting when we are trying to do this approval of affordable home, we were pushing the builder to have an affordable home on site rather than not outside of it. So would this allow us in future builders to go ahead and build here? I'm just tying up both of them here.
So the inclusionary bylaw
Mm-hmm.
only applies when somebody is proposing to build housing units. So if no housing units are being proposed, the inclusionary bylaw doesn't apply. This would allow developers to build under the MBTA bylaw or under the underlying zoning. They don't have to, if we rezone the downtown area or center school, it doesn't have to be built MBTA if a developer doesn't want to. It could be built underlying zoning.
Got it.
So it's not a real equal comparison to the inclusionary bylaw. The inclusionary bylaw was, so there is some connection. So in the draft bylaw for MBTA communities, we do have a provision that 10% of all the units need to be affordable. So if somebody proposes to build 100 units on an area, 10 of those units would have to be affordable on site, right? Or they'd have to get a special permit to locate them off site. And I don't see the planning board doing that, right? But then again, if you're building 100 units, you can offset those 10 units much more easily than the most recent request of 7 units
Right.
of family houses.
That's it. Thank you.
So if it's okay with those in attendance, what I'd like to do is, again, put the South Street on hold just for 10, 15 minutes. Let's make that a good, healthy discussion in a quarter hour. Looking at the rest of the map, do ZAC members or the public, I'm open to the public, have thoughts on other areas that might be considered or areas that might ought to be taken off? And I'm going to get the ball rolling. Oh, before I do that, I wanted to say this because I think it might be helpful. It strikes me that this will go to town meeting ideally in May. And it seems to me whatever the final proposal is, to get it passed is going to have to overcome at least 2 big hurdles. The first is simply educating the people of Hopkinton that we have no choice in creating zoning for more dense housing. The feeling in town, I think we all know, is frustration with rapid overdevelopment. And I think there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to anything that appears to encourage more, not slower development. And I think this will probably fall to the chair of the planning board to make clear at town meeting, we don't have a choice. We don't have a real choice. We must follow this and create some zoning. The next hurdle then is how many acres do we zone? I think there will be plenty of not in my backyard with this. Sorry, Curtis, but your backyard is part of the yard that probably most of the town would feel pretty good with. So we could add more to the map. You know, we can do anything we want right now and then remove later. But the more we add to the map, the more we run into no votes because it's getting closer to other people's homes. We can cut it all the way back to 50, I guess, and pass, correct me if I'm wrong on this, John. If we only proposed 50 acres, we meet the state's mandate. But I don't know if that's also best for zoning generally in town and trying to increase our affordable housing stock. It looked like you about had something to say, John.
Yeah, so I just want to caution you to not focus on the 50 acres right now. I would try and overshoot that just in case we have certain parcels that have non-developable land, because we don't want to have, agreement that 50 acres, right at 50 acres is where we want to go, and then find out that we're not going to comply anyway because we only have actually 45 developable acres. So I think if we aim for around 60 to 65, we should be safe.
As a minimum.
As a minimum.
Right.
And I mean, I don't even know if we could get 50 acres exactly on these things anyway, because they're all random numbers.
Okay.
That kind of brings up my logistical question. How will the developable property have to be designated or non-developable property? Is that our polygons, our wetland polygons off of our GIS map? Are they going to have to do more extensive wetland identification to take that out? Or
so the state has a process to do that, because that's how they're going to ensure compliance. They're going to have to take these maps, and for right now, I don't know exactly what that process is. I'm going to assume they're going to have GIS shapefiles that they overlay on our proposed thing and say, you got to take these parcels out. When we have, if we want to, at this meeting, identify the areas we want to move forward, I can reach out to the state and try and find that information out for next meeting.
Okay. So that's what I was going to say is my property and Carboni's property, there's not that much acreage available to develop outside of wetland areas. So that may reduce that considerably. We're not looking at 40 acres there. We're probably looking at 15 to 20, I would think. So I guess that's one of the things I was curious about is, we have wetland areas identified on our GIS map now. Are those just state? Those aren't, okay. So that may be what they're going to look at anyway.
Right.
So we might be able to pull some of that out.
Right.
as it is. And it doesn't sound like they're going to hold us to the local requirements, or may not hold us to the local wetland requirements anyway, outside of what the state wetland laws are. So I didn't know if before we went too deep into it, we probably ought to figure out what those numbers are as far as developable land goes.
Thanks.
And how we determine that.
Ted,
Oh,
Sam
there's
has
a
his hand
hand.
raised.
Yep, I just saw it. Thank you, Mary. Sam?
The chair, sorry, John, for making you answer this question again. But I guess somewhere along the lines, I kind of didn't understand fully the difference between, say, the apartments that you have highlighted off of Lumber versus apartments that are, let's say, legacy. Like, why are some allowed to be zoned that way and some aren't?
So yeah, that's a good question. So the previous question was, do those comply? And the answer is no, because they were approved under currently to do those types of developments, they have to get a special permit. What we're saying is, since Windsor at Hopkinton off of Lumber Street is already developed, we can zone that MBTA communities. And if some developer wanted to tear everything down and rebuild 15 units per acre, they would be allowed to.
Okay.
And to be kind of completely honest, the representative of MHP suggested we zone this because it was recently developed and no one's going to redevelop it anytime soon. So we included it from MHP's recommendation. But since it's already developed at probably a higher density than 15 units per acre, it wouldn't be that different than what's currently on there if somebody wanted to redevelop it under MBTA communities. It just doesn't currently exempt us from the bylaw or from the law, because it was approved. I believe that was actually a 40B, which wasn't necessarily discretionary, but under a different type of permit. It wasn't by right. And so we could zone the entirety of Legacy Farms, but then somebody could, you could theoretically have people redeveloping sections of that at 15 units per acre.
And I think you touched on this, John, one of the advantages of including Lumber Street, I can't remember the new name of it again, but is, in all likelihood, the town would approve it, saying we already have that type of development there anyway. It's not going to change a neighborhood. It's not going to, it's palatable if someone does decide to rip them down and put up another version of the same thing. So it makes it sellable at town meeting, I think.
Ted, if
yeah.
I may, through the chair,
Sure,
you were
John.
just asking if you thought that maybe we should look at adding some or just adding some more continuous runs.
Sure, you want to get that ball rolling?
Well, to your point, when you were just saying, let's go up to the Masonic Lodge, because, if God forbid the Masonic Lodge ever leaves, that's a good sized parcel. And then, then even Bill's Pizza and the land behind Bill's Pizza, that's one. And then going the other way, we have Golden Pond that's already exists for exactly what we're talking about. 3 stories with apartments, and the 4 lots before there, between Dunkin' Donuts and Golden Pond. I think Golden Pond already owns 2 of them anyway. But I remember they came about 10 years ago. They came to town meeting and had themselves rezoned to rural business. But to have that section, or maybe that whole end of West Main Street, just to have some continuity to what we're talking about, and have it look a little bit more contiguous, as opposed to a spot here, a spot there, and to your point, going down the street from the post office, both sides of the street on the post office. You give those people the right to rezone if they want to make it into multifamily or something like that. I know. I'm just throwing that out there because one of the things that we do hear the argument all the time: no more school children, no more school children. But we really do need some more economic diversity in this town. Speaking for a person, I'm in a 5-bedroom, 4-bath house, and I just built a 6-bedroom, 4-bath house. But we really could use, I came from the Board of Appeals. A guy was just talking about, he was getting divorced, and he said, I really want to stay in town, but I can't, I can't find a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom place to rent. And and just for that, and even me, I'm an empty nester, and I don't need this gigantic house, and I'd love to have a 2-bedroom here to go with our condo in Florida and go back and forth. I turned 66 today, so I'm in that next group now. So that's why I'm actually really think that this is so important. Now I guess I'm totally in the senior citizen category, and I'd love to be in downtown. Like when I was on Grove Street, it's so great to be able to walk downtown like you do, Ted, all the time. It's just great to walk up and down to the store and everything else. Oh, it'd be fabulous. But that's why I'm pushing.
Happy birthday,
John. Thank you.
Mary, do you want to respond to John's comment, or are you shifting?
No, I have a different one.
Could I just then, I like the Golden Pond idea, John. I hadn't thought of Golden Pond. And I think that kind of like the apartments on Lumber Street makes sense to zone. And I like expanding further east on Main Street to the Masonic Lodge. One of my notes heading into the meeting, and I'm not forgetting you, Mary, I promise I'm coming back, is the ABC streets I'm wondering about. I'm a little torn as I think about them. I don't think it's a historic district, but I think lots of the houses fall under the Historic Commission. And I living in the house that I live in the area that I live in, I really value the historic homes in town and get very sad when they get changed to pseudo-historic. But I certainly am a fan of expanding on Main Street. And I'm kicking around the ABC streets, which would then connect to those apartments back there. Does anyone else, before I go to Mary, have thoughts on John's comment?
Well, I didn't mean ABC. I'm sorry.
No, I know you didn't, but I
just meant Grove. Just that front row of Grove Street, sort of like just to mirror the post office. So sorry. Thank you.
Right. No, I was the one, and I'm not necessarily proposing ABC, but it was an area I thought about, but then had real reservations at the same time. Mary, go ahead then.
Okay, this is, I believe, probably for John Gelsich. And that is, we were talking about, if we have more than 50 acres, we can have lower density. Now, does that mean we can write it into our new bylaw, the overlay district, saying we cap our say we're going to designate 100 acres and it's 100 developable acres, and we're capping the density at 7.5 and or what it was it 15% or 7.5%? Yeah, something like that. Is that what you were saying we could do, or is that just okay?
So my understanding is we have to zone for 750 units.
Okay.
The minimum is 50 acres. So the minimum we can do is 15 units per acre in 50 acres.
Okay.
And I believe, I can check this and confirm, but I believe if we zoned 100 acres, we could do 7.5 units per acre because we'd still be meeting that 750 new units.
Right. Okay, good. So we could put into our specific bylaw, our Hopkinton bylaw regarding the MBTA communities, that the overlay districts are capped at 7.5%. I'm just using an example. And that would comply. So that's, you just want to double check that, or?
As long as we had 100 developable acres zone.
I understand that part. Yep. Okay. So I'd like to, just calling on the developers here, to understand that, what is, because I remember discussing this like a year and a half ago or so, when MBTA communities first came up, that 15 units per acre is pretty darn dense and probably not all that good for Hopkinton. Just, from a look and so on. John or Curtis or I don't know. Chuck, I don't know if you could comment on that. And I think that we should discuss whether or not our goal should be to try to find 100 developable acres and be able to limit the density a little bit.
I'm looking for a hand from one of our developers to offer a thought.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Okay, 16 to 12 sources per acre. Those are 4-story?
Looks like 3.
3 stories.
So this is, I sent this out to the board, I think after the last meeting, just showing, this is what the state has passed on, just examples of what certain developments look like and density, how it actually looks in real life.
Okay.
So this is, 15 units per acre here. And then we go to, there's 8. So if we're looking at 7.5 units per acre, this is what we'd be looking at. Not great. I don't know why they even chose these. These are terrible, terrible pictures.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, it would.
But it's like, the difference between a little bit of lawn and none at all kind of thing.
Right. And the other thing to think about is.
Yeah, Chuck has got his hand raised too.
This is a question for developers, right? They're allowed to do 15 units per acre. And I know developers are going to try and maximize the number of units, but there's also the potential they don't do 15 units per acre. They do 10 units per acre or 8 if that works better. And in certain areas, I'm thinking particularly Carbonis and Curtis's area, they don't have water and sewer out there. So they're going to be limited to what they can do with wells and septic unless they get water and sewer out there. And that might be true.
And maybe we don't want to limit the density, but I just wondered if we want that control and we want to put that in. That's just something we need to think about as we're moving forward.
I'm glad you threw in the last comment, Mary. I don't know for sure if we want to limit the density or not. I certainly have more thinking to do on that. Chuck, if you will introduce yourself with your address and name, please, and then we'd love your thoughts.
Sure. Chuck Joseph, 5 Benson Road, Hopkinton. My head is spinning with this discussion in a million different ways. I think my primary comment is I'm concerned about whether or not the impetus for the discussion is to fulfill the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. When you rezone Windsor Apartments to MBTA, nothing's going to happen there. There's no more housing that's going to be built. Many of the parcels that are here from a development standpoint will never be built because financially they're just not feasible. You don't tear down the preserve to build another preserve. You just don't do it. So I would just ask that the ZAC, which seems to be the ultimate authority here in terms of who's going to be recommending to town meeting, do you really want to recommend any areas that actually could be built to meet the spirit of the MBTA law? If you don't, then you can go the Lumber Street route and just zone stuff that already exists and nothing will ever happen. So that's primarily number one. Number two is being very familiar with most parcels in Hopkinton. A lot of the stuff that's on here does not make financial sense. So it's probably going to take itself out of the equation from that perspective. I do think that the town could benefit greatly from greater economic diversity than what we currently have. And I think that Ted appropriately said there is a slam the door mentality right now. Let's not do any more building of anything. That is contrary to what the MBTA is saying to the affluent suburbs. The MBTA zoning is saying to the affluent suburbs, you have to carry your weight. You have to develop some affordable housing. And I think that's something that I just hope that we can keep in mind as we have these discussions. I know, John, you have mentioned many times that we have come up with this and we have come up with that, but I think it would be beneficial for developers or the chamber to have some input, well thought out input on these various parcels, so that a different level or a different set of glasses on each parcel maybe might lend a little different viewpoint for Zach to consider when they're looking at the different parcels. And I'm not prepared to make those things tonight, but I do have a lot of thoughts about the parcels that are out there. So I just think that I know you're under the gun, but I would hate to see valuable viewpoints not considered because we're under the gun.
I'm just going to offer a thought or two, John, and then you will probably correct me, probably. Number one, first of all, thank you, Chuck. We are not the ultimate authority. The planning board is the ultimate authority about what gets proposed at town meeting. And there have been plenty of articles that have come out of Zach that have been amended and changed or rejected by the planning board. We are the first primary authority, but we're not the ultimate authority. I forgot my other thought, so I'll jump to John Gelsich. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it up.
Thank you. So I totally agree with Chuck. I think it makes sense to zone land that can actually be built, as zone it that way. I just want to do one clarification. So Chuck used the term affordable housing. I don't want the conversation on this to get derailed by people thinking that these are affordable housing developments. They're market rate developments with an affordable housing requirement per our bylaws. So if this conversation townwide starts going that these are affordable developments, it's going to go sideways really fast. So these are market rate developments that have an affordable component. The other thing I want to mention is that I've given a presentation to the planning board back in April. I gave a presentation to select board back in April. We had a meeting that, Chuck, I believe you suggested we include the South Street parcels. So the effort to include those constituencies is there. They just need to participate. And so I encourage all of you to reach out to whoever you can to give feedback to Zach so that we can incorporate the developer's perspective, chamber's perspective, affordable housing people's perspective, regular resident perspective. We need to get all of that there. We released a press release about MBTA communities that mentioned this meeting as a public input session, and we've got the chamber here. So tell everybody that you know to get involved in the Zach process so that we can get their perspectives. We don't, like Ted said, we don't have a ton of time left. We do have some time, but we need to get that input to us. And I think that's the role of Zach members and people who have an interest in that type of thing. We are looking for that feedback, so please provide it when you can.
I remembered my other thought. And again, Chuck, I appreciate everything you've said. And I know you've been to some Zach meetings. I very much want to find ways that we can diversify our housing stock and our socioeconomic picture in town. I also know the reality of what seems to get voted in and out at town meeting. A particular challenge we have here is I like the goals of the Commonwealth with the MBTA communities, but we also have to pass a map or we're going to be in deep trouble with the state. So we've got to find a way to balance both of those. I don't want to only pick spots where there'll be no development simply to say, good, now we have no penalties. But we also got to come up with a map that town meeting will approve. And I think that those are often in conflict, and we've got to find a way to solve that conflict. Vic?
Sam raised first. Do you want him to go first or?
Go ahead. I saw the yellow hand before I saw the other one. Sam, go ahead.
I'll have to change the color of my hand. I think it's a default Zoom one. I guess a comment and maybe a question. So I totally agree with the sentiment, Chuck, as well. But at the same time, a concern of mine, which is similar to what you said, Ted, which is the balance of something like this. I think about developments that may have directly impacted the cost of our education system and for all of our residents. And so, adding net new 750 units of this nature, I guess raises a question for me and to Ted or John or anyone really, where else is this type of law and the compliance with this law or regulation, where else is this being considered in our town planning? Does it account into our projections for our school growth and things like that? Is it being considered anywhere else? I want to make sure that we're not just, meeting the basic requirement here.
I don't have a good answer, except every projection of school growth has been wrong. So I bet you they don't include this.
I'm asking a question that's kind of a leading question, I suppose. That is my sentiment here, is that, I definitely want to make sure we introduce some additional, this type of development. But again, I just don't, I'm not seeing how this, along with any other recent developments, have been factored into our financial projections in our education school system and all that. So anyway, that's all I have.
John, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the only thing I can offer is, while Hopkinton has to do, or is required to do this, so is Wellesley, Lexington, I believe Dover, Natick, Weston. So I know the argument is always going to be, well, Hopkinton's got great school districts, but so do a lot of the other towns, and they, especially the inner core communities, have to do more units than Hopkinton does, like over 1,000. No,
Weston doesn't, because I've had my eye on Weston.
Yeah, I'm not saying all of them.
3 train stations.
Weston may not, but I know, Lexington and Arlington and all of those communities that also have very good school districts are going to have to are going to be required to do the same thing. So I don't know if this has been factored into like the school projections and finance stuff. But I will say that what we're dealing with, it's not Hopkinton exclusive. It's the other towns as well that may offset those requirements.
Weston, I only bring it up, it's my own bugaboo. I was ready for Weston to have to make some really, really hard choices because they have 3 stations on the Purple Line in their town, and they ended up with the same requirements that we have, and I don't know why. So anyway, I didn't mean to shoot down your entire comment, John. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, completely understand.
If I made that just a quick clarification.
Sure.
I think I wasn't trying to say that Hopkinton will be different than others and we are going to attract more than other towns do. I think I'm saying, I think we should strike a balance between leveraging some opportunities such as the one off of Lumber Street, perhaps if it makes sense for us to account towards that balance, and find others that may make sense to develop. So, I'm just not sure that we should just do net new 50 acres of 750 units. That's all I'm trying to say.
I think that's my inclination too, to try to find the balance that could also get a positive vote at town meeting. Vic?
Thank you. John, just a clarification on, you mentioned something about affordable housing, and this is market rate MBTA. Sorry, I was not part of the planning board in April or Zach, so not much into that. So would you explain that? And second is that, do we need to can we take this right now to the planning board with this draft map, or we wait till Zach finalizes it?
So generally what happens on zoning issues, which is one of, is Zach will do a lot of the legwork and provide something to the planning board that they can essentially take action on. So the planning board is going to be required to hold public hearings, advertise public hearings. And then planning board is going to be the entity that makes a recommendation at town meeting, whether to approve or not to approve. so Zach is really just kind of like the research and development arm of the planning board.
Mhm.
And so we try and work out all the kinks, provide a map and bylaw that has been vetted, and give residents and members of different boards and members of the business community an opportunity to discuss in an open forum that's not as formal as the planning board, and really kind of hash out the plan moving forward. And then the planning board can change that if they want, or they can take it and, you know, discuss and move it forward as Zach proposed, which has happened for a lot of things. But there have been other times where Zach has moved something forward to the planning board has changed it slightly, and then moved it on to town meeting. And I think the inclusionary bylaw actually might be one of those. I think Zach recommended 5 or 6 units per acre as the threshold, and the planning board reduced it to 5. So, you know, there's things where planning board can play with it. And before I get too far down the road, I also want to mention that regarding town meeting and the voting threshold, the state had recently, I want to say in the last like 5 years, adopted a provision that for housing choice initiative projects and initiatives, which MBTA communities is one of them, essentially any zoning proposal that increases housing reduces the voting threshold to a simple majority. So this is not going to be bound by the 2/3 majority at town meeting. This is going to require a simple majority to pass, because it is a housing production focused zoning initiative.
Wow.
And that's not an official definition, but it falls under the umbrella of what the state has deemed to be something that reduces the threshold to simple majority.
Yeah, good to know that. I mean, that's helpful. And John, just a back question of the first one. I still didn't get it, that MBTA as well as affordable housing. I'm sorry, that part of it, as you mentioned previously.
Yep. So the way that we had our inclusionary bylaw written before, it was changed at town meeting, this past town meeting, is any development, any subdivision that required an affordable unit had to be issued a special permit. And it was essentially just a formality. It was always issued. But at that point in time, you could get a special permit for either a unit on site, a unit off site, or a payment in lieu. And the planning board didn't have a ton of discretion which one. It was really whatever the applicant applied to do is what was granted. We've changed that now so that you can do an on-site unit by right, but you need a special permit for an off-site unit or a payment in lieu. So basically this development, any development under MBTA communities, would likely be more than 5 units and therefore trigger the requirement for affordable housing by right on site. They could, if somebody was developing, you know, the downtown area under MBTA communities and they wanted to do an offsite unit, they could apply for a special permit. But since we allow for affordable housing by right, they are required to do it and they aren't exempt from it. If we were still required a special permit for the on-site units as well, they would not have been required to put affordable units in the development, but now they are.
Yeah.
Now they would be.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm looking at my watch, and the John Coutinho rule, I'll call it, is that we need to wrap up by 9, because when John was chair all those years, that was his rule, which gives us about 16 and a half minutes. So here's what I'm going to propose. Number 1, agenda item number 2 about tree protection will table for this meeting. I will say that I have exchanged an email or two with some folks at the UMass School of Forestry, and they're going to help us better understand ways to define trees, tree area, basal area, et cetera. But those discussions are still in the works. I do see your hand, Rob. Give me just a second. What I'm going to propose then is we take the next 10 minutes to focus on South Street as part of the map, or not part of the map. John already stole exactly what I was thinking about South Street, which is that it could be really appealing for housing development. But I agree with John that that means it will not evermore be industrial available. And we certainly have a need for that. So once again, we hit some tension in trying to find a balance with these things. Rob, I don't know if you want to talk about South Street, but I see your hand, and then I'd love for us to spin into a South Street discussion. So go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Ted. Rob Benson, 178 Spring Street. So I think eventually it's going to go to the planning board and to town meeting. And so I try to think about what people are going to care about at town meeting. And looking at the big picture, we're just in the process of trying to get approval for a $158 million Elmwood School replacement. We've approved about $60 million in the past 7 years for school improvements, additions, Marathon School, all of it. So we're at like $220 million. So you think about 750 additional housing units and what that would do to the school system. So 10 years ago, 2013, we were at about 3,400 students. Now in 2023, we're at 4,000 students. Projected by 2030, we're at 5,000 students without even factoring in these MBTA communities projects. So it would dramatically impact the town and tax rates. Like right now, assessed value of your home is $632K. You're paying 5 figures in taxes. And so invariably, these MBTA community projects would probably be less than the average home value because they'd just be more dense and they wouldn't have as much land. So you'd think the prices of the homes would be less. It's debatable. And so it's just another way that everybody that lives in the town now is subsidizing to a certain degree. So that's what people, I think, are going to think about at town meeting when it comes to that. So Chuck made a good point. Is it something we want, like as a town, we actually want to build MBTA communities projects or not? The reality is, I don't think the town wants to. And I haven't come across anybody that's telling me building 750 new units is a good thing in a super dense fashion. So that's what I think the board or the committee should think about is what do people really want in town? And when it comes to town meeting, what are they gonna support? So that's be my take is if you just look at prior precedent and this past town meeting, we by overwhelming majority implemented inclusionary zoning bylaw, which makes it really, really hard now for developers to build new developments in Hopkinton. It makes it financially hard. And then you look at 3 years ago, there was the project next to the police station where Paul Mastriani wanted to turn it into 31 apartment units. The town was able to consider that property an historic district and prevented it. It's because people didn't want more traffic downtown. So just think about the prior precedent and how it's going to impact people and try to put yourself in their shoes when they actually come to the town meeting. That would be my request. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. And if someone has a specific response to Rob, I'll entertain it. Otherwise, I would love to hear what people's thoughts are on South Street. And I guess by extension, in the industrial, is it A over there on the other side of 495? It seems to me it may be a similar discussion. Maybe to get things started, if you're willing, Chuck, if you could represent why you like the idea of opening that up. And it might give us, especially those who weren't here last time, something to chew on.
Sure. I think when John and I were talking, I was specifically talking about 42 South Street, and then the next one up. I don't know if it's 52. I can't remember. But one of the things I was concerned about as a member of the chamber is not losing revenue. And if they became dense housing, I don't think the town would lose revenue. We would change from industrial to residential. And that's where John and I had a back and forth on it. However, and so I think we're talking about the mix of zoning and not necessarily the revenue generated by the zoning. At least that's my interpretation of it. So if we're not revenue negative by making the change, then I'm okay with that from a tax standpoint. From a mix standpoint, it's always conceivable. Zoning is not forever. You know, and now with a 51% majority, the town can change zoning wherever it wants to. We used to be a 2/3. So if 50 years from now, the town, there may be a type of zoning that we're not even thinking about. You know, there may be AI zoning or something we don't even know about yet. But the town is always able to make those changes. So my point was that I think there would be the least resistance to density at that intersection next to 495 relative to other areas of Hopkinton. If you were going to introduce a higher density, you might get a stronger pushback. I'd also like to remind you that in the Growth Study Committee findings of, I think it's a year and a half, 2 years ago now, the average house in Hopkinton had 0.6 children in the school system. 2 out of every 3 houses did not have children in the school system. The average apartment had 0.2 children. So those numbers are important as we think about this and we make assumptions about what the implications are going to be. Look at the data, and then you can make your assumptions based on the data. That's my point.
Mary.
I do like the idea of the 495 area that, you know, has been indicated on the map. Obviously, the parcels closest to 495, there would be a walking issue, so there'd probably need to be some sort of pedestrian walkway or something like that to get to the shopping area across the street, because South Street is very busy and it's very wide there and so on. So would be dangerous to walk across. So that's something to consider.
Wait, Mary, can I interrupt for just a second, just to clarify? When you said the 495 area, in my head, I went to that industrial east of 495. Are you talking about South Street?
I'm talking about South Street. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think I'm open to both of those right now. I just was unclear which area.
Okay, I thought we were just talking about South Street right now.
In my head, I think that they are similar questions. Potentially give up industrial area.
Okay. So
anyway,
right now, I mean, I do see, you know, the issue of it being taken out of the industrial category. But we've talked extensively over the last couple of years, and Zach, about the live work option, and South Street was the area that we would want to do that in. So if we have any likelihood of actually having some of that type of development, that would be where it should go. So in either of those parcels that we were talking about, on either the same side of the street as the grocery store or the opposite side of the street, I think South Street is set up traffic-wise to handle much better than the Parkwood area, much better. And you know, there's already commercial on that corner, so that supports residential in that area as well. I think overall, the South Street options, you know, and I know we can argue about exactly which ones and so on, but I think that that beginning part of South Street is an excellent area for an overlay.
John, we're not allowed to make it MBTA and then say it needs to be a work-live community, though, are we?
No, but with the new change to Section 3A, that retail, residential, mixed-use type development could get that result.
Okay.
But even so, just the location makes it work-live. It's like there could be work down the street and then they live there, you know, so it's not necessarily in the same building, but it's in the same very close region. That's all I was saying. Okay.
I was thinking that very same thing, and it's part of my pre-meeting notes, so I'm glad you raised that, Mary. I saw your hand up a bit ago, Arnold. Are you still interested in offering?
Yeah,
There
as
you
far as putting up housing being neutral as far as the tax base, I kind of question that, because to build homes, there's going to be kids in school. You have the commercial property that we just get the taxes. There really isn't an expense to the town. I don't have any children in school, and I don't see how it's going to be neutral. I know I moved to Hopkinton fairly recently, but I was on planning board, and then after that, the finance committee in my town, and which was Sharon, which had a very low commercial base, and everybody was always concerned, we didn't have enough commercial. So I think that's a factor if you're going to take away potential commercial. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, and it just seems to me that could be a con if you're taking away commercial land and have residential.
Thanks. Oh, there's a hand. Go ahead, Sam. Getting up against the clock.
Through the chair, just a comment. I think I like the idea of being close to South Street, mainly because of the interchange and trying not to bring in traffic into Main Street. Even though this is an MBTA community, I'm not entirely sure that they're going to drive all the way across town to Ashland. And so that brings me to I guess my final thought on this, because we're up against time, is I think I like the South Street end, or the as close to MBTA end, as potential for consideration.
Thanks. Vic, sorry.
I did. While I understand that the South Street, this is what again, I stay on the South Street. Maybe I'm just trying to be more. I know the traffic with Uptown and Milford coming through this, cutting through across, it really jams up. And with this MBTA community, people have to go to the town during the school pickup and drop off time also. But I'm not sure how good South Street would help here, especially building it across. And again, we need to look at the numbers from the revenue point of it, how we are losing and what we are coming up across. I mean, as on today, when I drop my kids in the morning, I need to start off way too early because of that 2 petrol bunks on the West Main Street. It's already a bottleneck. People know it, how we struggle it out here. So just want to check across on that. But yeah.
All right, I'm going to bring this discussion right here to a close, but I'm going to ask that everyone's homework be to talk this issue up with neighbors, with friends, with whatever groups or committees that you are here representing. John, I don't know if you had any hopes that we would have a map ready for you today, but clearly we don't.
Through the chair, sorry to interrupt. I was not expecting a map today, but I would request that everyone take a look at the map and provide me before the next meeting, or hopefully before the next meeting, if not at the next meeting, their version of what the map should look like. And if you guys send them to me before the meeting, I can distribute those to everybody, and then we can discuss them. But I would like to get some form of a map that we can bring to the state and we can bring to the planning board and discuss internally in the next few weeks, if not a month, if that makes sense.
You keep stealing my talking points.
Sorry.
No, I think you make them better than I would, so it's probably fine. So yeah, I think, what I want to do, and we're up against the Catino rule bad. We got a minute. We're going to break it. Sorry for Monday Night Football fans, but we need to pick at least one more meeting, and I would love to do it in 2 weeks so that we can do that planning board Zach thing that I think works for John. What do you guys think about a meeting in 2 weeks, probably on a Monday? That seems to be where we've fallen the last couple of years. Is anyone vehemently against that idea?
That's October 2nd?
I'm not sure. I don't have a calendar in front of me.
That's what it appears to be when I looked at my calendar real quick.
It is October 2nd. Planning board has a meeting that night.
Oh, really? Okay.
The next Monday, the 9th, is Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh, that's why it gets moved.
And then the 16th, the planning board has a meeting.
So planning board's going back to back 2 weeks. Can we do a Wednesday? Tuesdays are tough for me because that's Concom. Can we do a Wednesday in 2 or 3 weeks?
Wednesday, the 4th is open.
Looking at the crew, there's thumbs up coming in. All right. Oh, there's a thumbs down from Curtis, but he's recusing himself anyway. So let's do Wednesday the 4th for our next meeting. And John laid out the homework that we have. The other things that we need to have in that meeting, we need to have a committee reorganization meeting to vote on chair and vice chair. So that'll have to be on the agenda. John, we got to get our early term public forum in as well. Should we do that on the 4th, or is that going to gobble up too much MBTA time?
So I guess this would be up for Zach's, how do I say this? Usually we do it in the fall, right?
Yep.
So that we have something that we can work on for town meeting.
Yeah.
Personally, I think Zach needs to focus as much time on this versus anything else related to zoning.
Yep.
So I would suggest, and feel free to shoot this down, I would suggest that we don't have a fall forum, but maybe have a post-town meeting forum to then see what we can work on for the next coming year.
I agree with that idea. I didn't know if we were allowed. I didn't know if
there's
fall
no
forum was a mandate or not.
No, so Zach does not have a lot of regulations that it needs to abide by other than open meeting law.
Okay.
It's not in the charter. It's a subcommittee. It's essentially a subcommittee of the planning board, or an offshoot of the planning board. So it's whatever planning board wants Zach to do. So that's just been tradition that it's been in the fall, and I think that's because Zach was always a part-time committee.
Yep.
Starting in the fall, but since Zach has moved to a full year committee, I think it may make sense to, at this point, hold this public forum in the spring, and then reassess next fall.
I'm fully on board. Does anyone have any real objection to that? That looks like a no. All right. So number 1, next meeting will be reorganization and voting on officers. Number 2 and 3 and 4 will be MBTA, but hopefully we can still carve out some time to move tree protection along as well. That'll be my goal. Does that sound good to everybody? And please, and I'm telling myself this as well, please follow through on John's homework. It will make it a lot easier for us, and then allow us to have other discussions besides MBTA before the end of the new year. Sound good? To all the guests that, oh yes, John.
Sorry, not to be a pain. We also have a bylaw that goes with this, and that draft bylaw is including your emails. We have to look at that as well. So
I was thinking about that 45 minutes ago.
Also read the bylaw and redline it or send any suggestions. It is not complete. I filled in a lot of it, but there are some sections that are blank. So we do need to fill those in. So any feedback anyone can provide on that. Happy to sit down and have a conversation with anybody outside of the meeting. Feel free to reach out to me.
But am I right in saying, because you want some feedback from the Commonwealth, the map ought to be the first priority? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I think we need a motion to adjourn the meeting. Anyone have that?
So move.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
And I'm looking for my attendance sheet. I guess I could do it by the window. Oh, found it. All right. We have a motion and a second. How do you vote, Mary?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Arnold?
Yes.
Madhu?
Yes.
Curtis?
Yes.
Vic?
Yes.
And Sam?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the guests who helped us out today, and hope to see you again at future meetings.
Bye.
Thank you,
Have a
John.
great night, everyone.
You.
Thank you.